For sure.
And we are going to jump into the background of Outkast leading up to the recording. But first, we're going to do our favorite segment here, and it is going to be Outkast Stankonia by the numbers. The first number we're going to do is 1, as in 1 year, which is the amount of time that Outkast spent creating the album that would become Stankonia. Now, that's a long time to spend in the studio. And I could definitely see why you end up with 73 minutes worth of material.
You got to get those skits in there.
Yeah, exactly. You might not want to include 73 minutes worth of material, but you have it certainly by the end of 1 year. I want to see what's on the cutting room floor. There's like 47 other tracks.
Yeah, what skits weren't good enough?
All right. The next number that we're going to do is 2, as in number 2, because this album debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200 charts, selling 530,000 copies in its first week.
Wow.
That is
pretty
pretty
damn solid.
Damn.
Yeah. And the next number is 5, as in 5 times platinum. This album sold more than 5 million copies in the US alone. And I did notice that there is a big discrepancy in their US sales versus their global sales. They sold way more in the US than they did in the UK or in Australia or any of those places. And I do think that there is an aspect to their sound that is very American. It is this kind of melting pot of a bunch of different influences all coming together into this sound, taking a lot of very uniquely American sounds like R&B and jazz and blues and kind of putting that all together in an album. So I can see why it was more popular in the US than outside of the US, but I mean, 5 million copies, it's nothing to sneeze at.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And they were coming off of the success of a couple other records and singles. Like, why? I guess you're going to tell us in the story how they were poised for this kind of success, right? Okay, my next question is, do we know how successful generally hip-hop artists were abroad at this time? Because you bring up an interesting point, but was it just that the American-grown art of hip-hop was still a little bit insular at that time, or no?
That's a good question.
That is a very good question. I don't have
the rest of the
that.
world still racist? Is that what you're asking?
Was Puff Daddy selling records abroad?
Eminem was a thing, okay? So Eminem could have been selling over there.
Jesus.
I don't really know. I honestly don't know. I do feel like a lot of hip hop was very distinctly American for a while, and it was kind of underground. The ultra cool people in some other countries were listening to it, and then when they would take that and develop their own sound within their own countries, there's a lot of French hip hop now, and you can listen to Taiwanese hip hop, and a lot of different cultures have taken hip hop and made it their own. But I do think it took a while to gestate in the system out there until it kind of broke out and became popular. So I don't have a great answer for you, but I'm gonna,
I mean, the numbers do kind of speak for themselves, though, don't they? Because like you said, that did not sell, and I mean, you have even like so the Chronic 2 came out same year.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that sold in the UK, but it sold 1.5 million to the US's 6 million. And I feel like Dr. Dre at that point that's the hip hop artist. So
and that had Eminem all over it too, and he was crushing the sales. So
I mean, I guess not that big.
Yeah,
well, but population size. I mean, if England's the size of Texas or something, right? And you sell 1.5 million
true.
in the UK versus
300,000 is platinum in the UK, or is it 600,000? I think it's 300,000 is platinum in the UK.
Something like it's 5 times platinum at 1.5 mil.
Okay, yeah, so 5 times platinum in the UK, and it went 6 times platinum in the US. So,
interesting.
Yeah, interesting. Rob, you're always bringing up the provocative questions that I am unprepared to answer. Thank you. See, if we were on DL's podcast, he would have had this information ready to go.
No, I would have just called the rest of the world racist and then moved on.
That solves it in a nice little box. There's your bow.
Well, let's move on before we alienate any more of our listeners here.
Yeah, sorry,
we're going to say our next number is 20, and that is 20 million. The number of albums that Outkast has sold over their 6-album career. So they're
Wow,
averaging over 3 million per album that they are
good for
selling.
them.
Not too bad.
Very impressive.
The next number we're going to talk about is 53, which is the number of acting credits that Andre 3000, aka Andre Benjamin, has on IMDb, including the not all that terrible Marky Mark movie Four Brothers, and
God, that's right.
And he has a 2-episode stint on Rob's favorite show, The Shield.
I remember.
Yeah.
I very much
I gotta
remember.
say, Andre 3000 would not be an actor if he wasn't Andre 3000. There's no way he's getting cast in movies if he wasn't Andre from Outkast. He's not bad or anything like that, but he's definitely not like, oh my God, where have you been all my life?
I think he also played Jimi Hendrix in some biopic thing. Specifically, I remember watching that scene, that Eric Clapton scene, when he first made it to London. So
he is a good pick to play Jimi Hendrix, I would say.
Kind of looks like him a little bit.
He looks like he's got a heroin problem, but he's actually just like really in good shape.
Well, he's already got the wardrobe for it, so that's a start.
That really was like he was one of his big fashion influences. He had posters of Jimmy up on his wall his whole life and stuff like that, so it makes sense. I like it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. And the last number we're going to talk about is every single one. And that is every single one of you listeners. We love you for listening every week. We thank you for coming along on this journey with us. If you want to support us, you can go ahead and tell a friend about the show. Give us 5 stars, write a review on whatever podcast platform you happen to listen on. We have a Patreon. You can go find us 1001 Album Complaints on Patreon. If you want to donate $5 a month, give us a beer. We would love that. We do have some bonus content up there. Rob, I'm trying to think of the release schedule. We will have
Guilty Pleasures definitely.
Guilty Pleasures. Okay, yeah. We have our Guilty Pleasures episodes up on our Patreon right now. You can see those songs that we sing along to in the shower that we're very embarrassed about loving, but love dearly. It is eye-opening, and there's some truly terrible songs on there.
we really yelled at each other on that one. Those were fun.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
All right, let's jump in to the background of the band Outkast. Now, I will say, before I get into this any further, I did pull some information from a YouTube channel called Deep Discog Dive. And props to them for doing heavy lifting on the research. Normally, I'll get it from a lot of different sources, and I did get it from a lot of different sources on this one too, but I just happen to like that channel. So Deep Discog Dive, thank you for providing some of this background information on Outkast. Now, Outkast is a duo of Andre Benjamin, professionally known as Andre 3000, and about 45 other nicknames, and Antoine Patton, who primarily goes by the moniker Big Boy and surprisingly also has about 45 other nicknames.
I took note of some of his better nicknames. The one I really like is Daddy Fat Sax.
Yeah. Oh man, is it Sax or Stacks? It was Daddy Fat Stacks.
Oh, I thought it was Sax.
It was like he's got gigantic testicles.
Yeah, both are right.
Yes, it's spelled like saxophone, but.
Oh, okay. I thought it was Daddy Fat Stacks, but I could be. I've been rapping along to the song AT-Aliens incorrectly.
No, because I'm confirming that Big Boy has a song spelled Daddy Fat Sax as in saxophone on one of his solo releases.
Good for him. All right. So they grew up in Atlanta.
Good for him.
Yeah, good for him. Okay.
To be clear, sax presumably means his penis.
Yeah.
Maybe he means sacks of money. I don't know.
I don't count my money. I weigh it.
Exactly. Yeah. Right next to my gigantic testicles and my fat sack. All right. So these two grew up in Atlanta. They met in high school in 1992, and they got to know each other through rap battles in their high school cafeteria, which made them fast friends. They realized that they had a lot in common and that they're both super into music. They end up connecting with Organized Noise, which is an Atlanta-based production team, connects them to the Dungeon family, which is like a hip-hop collective from Atlanta that included such acts as Goody Mob and TLC, also in that same sort of collective there, which, by the way, those music collectives, they just sound fun. It's almost like we should do one of those, you know?
So,
Unlimited, baby.
so this is the time of, yeah, because we talked about TLC, Waterfalls, or sorry, Crazy Sexy Cool was made or released at least on LaFace Records out of Atlanta, right? And what were the other big Atlanta groups? Criss Cross. Who else was, what was happening in Atlanta before Outkast was happening?
So in Atlanta at the time, it was kind of a little bit of that, like you said, that LaFace Records were sort of dominating that. Bobby Brown was also out of Atlanta.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was a little bit before then. And he actually will come up in our story, interestingly enough, and not that far from now. So they get signed pretty quickly. It's 1992, and they get signed to a record deal. And for reference, Andre 3000 was born in 1975. And Big Boy was also born in 1975. So 2002 comes along and they're getting signed. That's actually, I mean, sorry, not 2002. So 1992 comes along and they're getting signed. That's pretty good. They're like 18 years old. That's
yeah, young pups, man. Sure.
Yeah.
But they were signed by LaFace Records. And that is actually the record label. We might have touched on this in the TLC episode, but for those who have not listened to it, that is the record label of one Antonio L.A. Reid and Kenneth Edmonds, who is professionally known as Babyface. And that is a combination of their two names, L.A. and Face, LaFace Records.
Oh, so, I didn't. Interesting.
Yeah. It's not a bad record name either.
Yeah.
So 1993. They get an opportunity to release their debut single, Players Ball. Shortly after that, they released their debut album, Southern Playalistic Cadillac Music, in April of 1994. And they're just 19 years old. Now, this album is it's actually honestly pretty good. You can see some flashes of the more refined production style that they will eventually mature into, but they're 19 years old.
Yeah.
No 19-year-old is making their magnum opus, but for a debut album, it's pretty good, and it comes out and it gets well received. It's not that they come out and it's just this totally muted response. People are like, wow, this sounds pretty different. This is an interesting take on hip hop that was outside of the vein of what people were hearing in the general hip hop world. And we'll touch base on that a little bit more.
Okay, you're going to dive into it. Okay.
We'll touch base on what was going on with hip hop in this era, in like 1994, a little bit more. But I mean, this is like Biggie Smalls is popular.
Illmatic came out.
Yeah.
This is like
Fuji's first album came out.
This would be very, very early in the timeline of non-New York hip hop being a thing, like at all. Like, you know what I mean? It was born in New York, and it was kind of in New York for a long time.
Yeah, and we can just touch on that now. So let's contextualize hip hop, just generally speaking. It's universally agreed. Hip hop started in the Bronx, which is a borough of New York, in the mid 70s, was predominantly considered belonging to the New York scene throughout all of what is classified as the old school period, which is like mid 70s until the mid 80s, where they get kind of the new school period. In the mid 80s, mid to late 80s, you start getting the LA scene starting to make a little bit of noise. That's when you get Public Enemy and NWA. They're kind of putting LA on the map as a power player in the hip hop scene.
Sorry, Ice-T was East Coast, but
now, once you get into the 90s, rap is basically East Coast, West Coast, New York, LA. That's where the big money is going. That's where the listeners are. And not that they're the only people making music, but everybody's kind of aping the New York or LA style. And that's where one of the people talks about, like, when Aquemini came out, they're like, it was a big deal because it got played in New York. And New York didn't play anybody else's rap. New York just played New York's rap.
Okay.
But they're like, oh, Aquemini, this is actually pretty good. We're going to play some weird-ass Southern band's rap. What's going on with this? So, again, it's not that everybody was coming out of New York or LA. You do have TLC, you have Arrested Development, some of the more successful mid-90s ones. I mean, fucking Vanilla Ice was out of Miami. But
like Ghetto Boys from like Texas or something.
Yeah, there's a bunch of like people that come up, but there's not like a scene that you're like, oh, this is like what we need. We need this style that's very distinct. Everybody's kind of doing the New York or the LA style. And a hallmark of the New York and LA styles that were really popular at the time is a pretty heavy kind of boom bap backbeat that underpins these raps that are kind of generally focused on braggadocio, insults, tales of criminal activities, etc. Even when the lyrics get personal, it tends to be about like financially struggling before they make it big and now they have a lot of money. There's not a whole lot of introspective inner struggles that they're talking about.
It was kind of, there was a lot of conscious rap, particularly in New York City for a long time with like De La Soul and Public Enemy and that sort of thing. But then you had the Tupac Biggie thing. And that just everybody just wanted to talk about how amazing they were and how stupid everybody else was. And we ended up getting that for kind of forever.
Yeah, it kind of transformed into I have a whole bunch of money and I get the most women. And then that's kind of what it's been for quite some time.
Yeah.
And now it's I also do a whole bunch of prescription drugs and I have a lot of money and I get a lot of women.
So. Hey, Adam's Novocaine, Joe. We just figured it out.
Yeah, exactly. It is. You should call it Xanax, Joe. There we go. All right, so they release Southern Playalistic Cadillac Music in 1994. The album goes platinum, and they win Best New Rap Group at the 1995 Source Awards, which is a pretty big deal in the hip-hop community to win Best Rap Group at the Source Awards. But to show you how kind of sclerotic and closed off the hip hop scene was at the time, they were resoundingly booed when they took the stage to accept their award for Best New Rap Group. And Andre, they were booed so much that they had to sort of talk about it in their acceptance speech. It was ongoing boos. And so Andre basically delivered the Marty McFly line of like, maybe you aren't ready for this, but your kids are going to love it. And if he wasn't fucking right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You mean when Marty McFly invented guitar for?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
When he took the blues away from Chuck Berry. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. So they get a lot more creative freedom from LaFace for their second album, which becomes 1996 ATLians. And in a theme that's going to pop up a lot in Outkast's career, this was kind of a departure from their first album. It's a bit more introspective. It's not like a lot of the other hip hop that was happening at the time. It's kind of psychedelic. A lot of the lyrics are deeply personal, deal with their lives as successful musicians and not in the like Ice Cube, fuck all the haters kind of way. It's more like my life has radically changed and I don't quite know how to deal with it way, which makes for a much more interesting album. And that's one of the reasons I really like that album a lot. I think it's an interesting look at an artist, again, who is very young. They're like 21, 22 years old when this comes out. And they're just blowing up because that album goes double platinum. And it gives them their second successful album in a row. So album number 1 goes platinum. Album number 2 goes double platinum. I mean, you cannot ask for much more for a number 1 and 2 album, right?
In terms of hits, would there have been anything mainstream in the late 90s that would have done any kind of like crossover? Like I know we're talking about Miss Jackson on this album. Were there any like hits in that realm? Or was it mostly in kind of the
from Outkast world?
Yeah, from Outkast.
From the first two albums.
Rosa Parks was an underground hit. But even then, like that would have got, I mean, you're in Pennsylvania, Philly.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I'm like,
so what might it probably would have got a little bit of play, but not like nothing. Rosa Parks would be the closest there would have been.
So interestingly, DL, I was actually sharing this story with the guys from the podcast. I went to a friend's 10th anniversary wedding party recently, and I was one of like 4 white people there. So it's all like mid 40s black men and women. And they played music for 5 hours, and I recognized exactly one song, and it was "This Is How We Do It," and that was kind of like the one like pop song that they played. And
my dad would have recognized that one. So
everybody knew all of the songs, and not just they knew the choruses. The song would start, and it'd be 4 seconds in, and they'd be like, "Yes!" Start singing along. get out and start dancing. I was like, there's an entire period of 90s R&B that I just don't know anything about. And I thought I liked 90s R&B, but apparently there was just a lot going on that was not percolating up to the suburbs that I was getting to listen to.
That's funny.
So
That's
Adam,
good.
in response to your question, no, there's probably nothing that you would have
heard. All right. Just curious.
So we'll level set again. Outkast, still on LaFace Records. They have 2 big albums. They've sold 3 million copies combined of their first 2 albums. They get a big budget to tackle their next album. They take an approach of a very collaborative writing style. They spend lots of time experimenting in the studio together in an attempt to push their sound even farther away from this run-of-the-mill hip-hop that was very popular at the time. This results in 1998's Aquemini, and it is considered by many to be the first breakout album for a Southern rapper. It featured a level of production that was not really being seen much in hip hop. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's organic, but the sounds are they're heavily affected and not necessarily made on acoustic instruments all the time, but it's pointed out as a big turning point in the level of sort of rich production that came to be expected in rap albums. It really did, I think, throw a marker down and say, this is what is possible if you put in the time and you get the mastery of the equipment and you're not just like throw down a beat, rap, move on. It's like, all right, we have the skeleton of a song and we're going to workshop this bastard for months and months and turn it into something that is layered and nuanced and cool.
I think that that's spot on. I think that you had like the whole creation of it in New York, onto eventually going to the West Coast, because Dr. Dre specifically learned how to kind of make what you know as, I guess, a low ride beat or that sort of thing. And then this was, I think, through Aquemini and the previous album was kind of what made the Dirty South, quote unquote, beats kind of the new, okay, this is the new thing now, which would turn into Lil Jon and Ludacris and all these other, like basically the next 10 years of mainstream rap.
Yeah. And I think it opened up not just Atlanta, because Atlanta definitely became a big power player in the music scene, but it opened up people to be like, well, hey, maybe there's cool stuff happening in Houston. Maybe there's cool stuff happening in St. Louis. You know, you get Nelly coming out and these kind of more kind of bombastic beats that were coming out of there.
And then Chopped and Screwed and all this crazy crap starts coming out.
Crunk
Not crap,
and all that
good
shit.
stuff. Yeah, crunk.
Yeah. So I do think that the South...
These are really fun words for 4 white dudes to be saying.
They really are. Yeah. I should have had my pimp cup, my chalice. Remember that?
I'm finna use some of these words in everyday conversation. So.
Adam, no, I'm gonna.
That's very crunk of you.
Wow.
Doesn't that mean I'm fixing to, or like I'm going to? I can't say finna.
Not in your mouth.
No. All right. I'll add that to my list of banned words that I can't say. The N word and the F word now.
So I think that it is important to point out the importance that the South plays in Outkast in general and just the type of music that they make, because the South has a rich history of music that I really do think they drew from a lot of that. You get 70s rock and funk, but you also get some soul, you get some gospel, you get blues, kind of like Dixieland jazz type of stuff. And I do really think that there wasn't a lot of this incorporation of these diverse types of music into a hip hop song that was happening with any kind of frequency. You would get stuff like A Tribe Called Quest would use, an old like acoustic bass line or something like that and then chop that up. But that was still just kind of one note thing. They were just taking one style. They were like, oh, we're going to clip up some old jazz stuff and we're going to rap over that. And it was really great. Don't get me wrong. It was awesome. But I feel like Outkast is like, well, we're going to take a little clip of something from an old jazz song, and then we're going to have a gospel choir sing over it, and then we're going to put a little country twang underneath it, and they just kind of mashed it all together.
Throw some weird synth in there.
Right.
Yeah.
And some synth. Yeah, right. And yeah, you've got this melange of stuff.
Yeah. So one of the other things that Aquemini really introduced to the world is this concept that now hold on for a second here. I don't want to shock anybody. Sometimes a guy on a hip hop album might sing a little bit. And it was kind of like, oh, whoa, what are you doing there, Andre? That is not hard. That is not hard at all. All right. You get yourself a gun and you talk about shooting people.
Singing is clearly not manly.
Yes. But I mean, it kind of was this sort of like, well, what are you doing? That's not what the image that popular culture has of the lead singer of a hip hop group. Is that a guy who sings and a guy who can like soulfully emote? That's not what this is all about. But it catches on and it does pretty well because Aquemini goes 3 times platinum in the US.
Damn.
So album 1 time platinum, album 2 times platinum, album 3 times platinum. That's pretty damn good. They got to be feeling pretty good. And they're like, you know what we need to do? We need to buy ourselves a studio. We got a little bit of money. We got more art to make. Clearly, they have a lot of art to make. And so they're like, you know what? Let's go ahead and buy ourselves a studio. And they find the Atlanta-based studio where they recorded their first ever song. They buy it. They name it Stankonia Studios. The studio that became Stankonia Studios was previously owned by Bobby Brown.
Whoa.
And as the story goes, they had recorded back there in 1992. They always wanted to get back there, but they never got the chance. And apparently they run into Bobby Brown at a concert in North Carolina and they get to talking and they're like, hey, man, we just released a bunch of great albums. We got some money. We're looking to buy a studio. We kind of want to get back into your studio, though. And he's like, well, why don't you just have my studio? And they're like, oh, we just like have your studio? That's amazing. And he's like, well, I mean, it's in foreclosure. So if you want to buy it there, you can buy it.
Wait, Bobby Brown was having money trouble?
Yes. You know, weird.
I wonder why.
Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
Wait, yeah. I just looked up that Aquemini is also like an hour and 20 minutes long. So
jeez.
They might have a problem.
To say.
You'll love it.
A lot to say. Yeah. Well, and the next album that they release after the Speaker Box and the Love Below, that's a double album. So they're basically just like, yeah, we can't make one.
A lot to say.
That's 2 hours and 15 minutes, according to Spotify.
It is.
Oh my God. Well, with that though, CDs so Speaker Box and Love Below though that's each one of them coming out with a different album.
Well, they both a double album though, DL. That's the point.
Yeah.
Yes. That's them finally admitting, look, we're not doing this together anymore. I've got my thing.
I can't express myself in one album. It's impossible. I will not be contained.
But listen, acquiring that studio, it was a big leap for them. They actually talk about like when they first walked in, their jaws just hit the floor when they're like, all of this equipment, we can use all of this equipment. I'm like, yeah, it's all yours, man. You just bought it. Do whatever the hell you want. And they went ham. They went a little crazy. And they basically spent a year in the studio working on this album. Now,
I mean, I get that. If you gave me the keys to a foreclosed studio and I walked in there and there's like, the 140 track mixing board and the ISO booth,
full Brian Wilson.
I wouldn't leave. I would sleep.
Yes.
I'd have my food delivered. I'd jar up my urine for future. I don't know.
Well, interesting you say that because this was produced by 3 people, not the jarring of the urine. I mean, I don't know. They didn't mention that, but I can't say for sure. But so Big Boy and Mr. DJ and Andre 3000 produced this record. Big Boy and Mr. DJ would essentially sleep at the studio. They said they were living with it 24/7 so that whenever inspiration struck, they could immediately go and experiment. And apparently they were also smoking shit tons of weed in the studio because multiple people were called. You just walk in there and you open the door and it's like wafting weed out the door. But they're like, it's 7 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock at night, whenever inspiration strikes, you got to be ready to record. And you got to not only put something down, but then you got to be like, oh, well, what if I tweak this? What if I tweak this? What if I spend an entire 5 days trying to get the hi-hat sound to sound a little bit more crisp? Like these are the kind of like perverted excursions going on.
And that sounds awesome. I totally agree. I'm down for that part. I just think you should have edited it more. That's my key complaint. So.
Well, I think part of, and DL has hinted at this before, Andre had a very different approach to writing music. And so they were kind of writing separately at the time. Andre would sit at home with an acoustic guitar, and that's how he would write his stuff. He would sketch out the songs and then bring them into the studio in kind of a more complete form. And I'm not saying he didn't do a ton of work in the studio, but he was definitely bringing them in and saying, this is going to be the song. Now let's build around it.
He said he wrote the song with an acoustic guitar. I was just picturing an acoustic guitar in like the corner of his room, and he's just shouting at it, dancing its way.
He was writing the lyrics on the walls of his house. He was just a little angsty teenager. I don't know. But also, apparently, after they released their second album, Andre gave up smoking weed and became a vegetarian. And so I wonder if potentially the reason that he was not hanging out in the studio with them all the time is because they're getting like, catfish po' boys delivered and smoking blunts constantly. And he's like, I want to have a frisee salad. And yeah.
He's kind of an oddball, as I understand. I mean, we should mention that he recently released his first solo record. It is a jazz flute odyssey. And with song titles such as That Night in Hawaii, when I turned into a panther and started making these low register purring tones that I couldn't control, shit was wild. That's a 10.5-minute
track. They can't even edit titles.
Not smoking pot my ass.
Yeah, right. He said he's a vegetarian. He's eating mushrooms constantly.
Yeah, there you go.
So I have to say, though, for a 90s rapper to be like, I'm vegetarian and I don't smoke weed, that's so not gangster. Like, that is the exact opposite of gangster.
True that.
But
and rapping about masculinity, questioning it, female empowerment.
Yeah.
Why aren't we paying child support when we should? Like, all the shit that nobody else was talking about back then.
Yeah.
They were fucking pretty groundbreaking in that way.
Yeah. And as DL, as you said before, they really did try to do the whole like rising tide raises all boats type of thing. They brought 16 guest appearances on this album, including the now famous half of the duo Run the Jewels, Killer Mike. And I will say I saw Outkast in 2001 on the Smokin' Grooves tour, which was an amazing show. It was really good. Like Jurassic 5 played on that. Ooh. And Lauryn Hill did a solo acoustic set. And then Outkast came out and played, and they had Killer Mike with them. And Killer Mike did like 4 or 5 songs that were his with them. And it was an amazing show. And good on them for recognizing the talent, because now Killer Mike is considered, one of the more cutting edge guys with Run the Jewels.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Who, if you guys don't listen to Run the Jewels, Adam, I know you don't. So listen to Run the Jewels.
Who are you talking to?
I know. I know DL and Rob do. I was talking to Adam. Adam, listen to Run the Jewels. So another person they have, and we will cover this on one of the songs on our focus list, is Be Real from Cypress Hill, which is about the polar opposite of sound and subject matter from Outkast. It's Be Real comes in the studio is like, where's the air raid siren going off constantly in your songs? Like, I don't understand it. You can make songs that don't just have a happening all the time. And I think one of the more interesting ones that they have is Erykah Badu. And it's interesting because Andre had been in a relationship with her for several years, had a son with her in 1997, and in 1999 they broke up, basically while they were recording this album. And the song Miss Jackson is partly about Andre's relationship with Erykah Badu and her mother, and Big Boy's relationship with the mother of his son. Now, it is important to note that apparently Erykah Badu's mom loves the song Miss Jackson and now has the vanity license plate that says Miss Jackson.
That is Erykah and Andre stole George Costanza's baby name too, because their kid's name's Seven.
Oh wow!
Oh nice.
Yeah.
I was not trying to out a minor on this program, DL. Thank you very much, Richard.
I think he's like 20 something now.
I know. Oh God, yeah, he is. God, it was so long ago.
No, we're old, dude.
Yeah. Oh my God. Oh wow. Wow. Damn. Okay. So I will say that in the 90s, it was very popular to have lots of guest appearances on your albums, and it often did not feel very additive. But I feel like the guest appearances on this album do provide a nice contrast because they're not doing Outkast's thing, and Outkast isn't really doing their thing. They're kind of two people doing their separate things. I think it provides a nice contrast. It's additive in a way that I don't think a lot of the collaborations at the time were.
It's also refreshing that there aren't 47 producers on it.
Yeah.
Where nowadays you cannot find a hip hop album where there isn't.
Yeah. I feel like every artist is just like, if I'm on a song, I'm also producing the song and I have my production company. And so everybody, But for an album like this is highly produced and it was very intentionally produced by, again, basically three people. Mr. DJ, not a great name. Andre 3000, kind of a great name. And Big Boy, also kind of a great name. So this album gets released again in October of 2000, and it ends up winning in 2002 the Grammy for Best Performance by a Duo or Rap Group for Miss Jackson and Best Rap Album. Clearly very well received. It is described as breaking the boundaries of hip hop, specifically Andre 3000. Again, one of the first rappers to sing. And I honestly think that the fact that he is not the best singer makes it better.
Yeah.
He was just killing
it's a
it
little
perfectly.
charming, you know?
Yeah.
It's kind of, endearing, I'll say.
Well, and one of the other things that you have to recognize is that Big Boy less so, but definitely Andre, he's got a lot of character in his delivery. And we talked about it in the Gangstar episode where Guru, that kind of monotone delivery that he had, got really old. But Andre, he's delivering it in a weird melodic style. And I do really like that. And I think that it adds a lot of flavor to these songs.
Yeah, I agree. Kind of like we talk about delivery men, vocalists of old. Well, the reason Frank Sinatra is so great is not just because he hits the notes, it's because he has really interesting phrasing and his personality comes through in the vocal. And I think you get that with Andre 3000.
Definitely do. So I think
I just quickly have to stick up for Big Boy because, and I'm not downplaying what everybody's saying about Andre because you're right. Like he's kind of the new age in the whole thing, but for a hip hop enjoyer, Big Boy brings such a respectable old school rap aura to Outkast. Like for every weird new thing Andre's doing, Big Boy is doing really traditional hip hop really, really well.
Yes.
And I love him for that. His album Speaker Box that he did quote unquote on his own it might be my favorite Outkast album out of all of these. So he's really awesome.
That's an interesting dynamic I didn't really think about because even in like old school comedy duos, you had the wacky guy and you need the straight man to bounce the stuff off of. If you had two Andre 3000s, it wouldn't work, right?
Yeah.
The fact that you have him
just a bunch of flute.
Somebody who's the anchor that then allows Andre to do his thing off of that. I think that's an interesting dynamic.
And not just an anchor, but as DL said, a very good anchor. He's good. He's not just, speaking of Cypress Hill, he's not the other guy from Cypress Hill who absolutely sucks at rapping and Be Real carries the show the entire time. It is not that.
Don't act like you don't know Sendog's name, dude.
Fair enough. So yes, I would say that in terms of the fundamentals, like he has very solid fundamentals in his delivery. I honestly, that line is the "Am I crooked letter? Ain't no one better. When I'm on the microphone, you best to wear your sweater because I'm cooler than a polar bear's toenails."
Yeah.
Fucking line. Like that's just really good. It's clean. You could say that in a kindergarten, and they'd be like, "Wow, polar bear's toenails, yeah." It's good work, man. So let's dig in to some of these specific tracks.